In Russia, which invaded Ukraine, there are many tensions developing outside the war. Vladimir Putin, the authoritarian leader of Russia, is currently facing the most challenging times of his political career. Every day, Putin's power decreased a little bit more. But what led Putin to find himself in such a precarious position? Let's not forget the difficulties Putin faced at the time he started this war. And let's take a look at the factors that led to the conflict in the first place. There was a steady decline in public support for Vladimir Putin in Russia. In Russia, polls were taken and the results showed that Putin's time in politics was coming to an end. In addition to this, other nations did not respect Putin as much as they had in the past. Putin began the war in order to demonstrate his power to the rest of the world and to gain support from the Russian people. Putin intended to use this conflict to establish a reputation for himself as a national hero. He also intended to win a victory that would go down in history by expanding the borders of Russia. But this did not come to pass. The Ukrainian army put up an extraordinary fight and was able to foil all of Putin's schemes. Before the war began, Vladimir Putin made several public statements in which he predicted that it would only take a few days for Russia to conquer Ukraine. His statement that the Russian army could be in Kiev within hours roused the excitement of his supporters. As soon as the war began, it became clear that Putin had been lying. The Russian invasion was initially halted by the Ukrainian armed forces. Then, one by one, it was able to successfully free the territories that were occupied by Russia. This has done a significant amount of damage to Putin's reputation. When Russia made the decision to go to war, the first protests broke out as well. The insurgents who coordinated the anti-war demonstrations claimed that Putin's political career was the sole motivation for this conflict. However, Putin took a very strong stance against these activists and intervened. The beginning of this war by Russia has also resulted in significant harm to the Russian economy. The Russian government has announced that the country's inflation rate has hit all-time highs. The people of Russia were informed of a new tax increase every single day. Because of this circumstance, there were more people in Russia who were against the war. As a result of the deterioration of the Russian economy, citizens have demanded that the war be brought to an end. Increased number of people took part in demonstrations against Putin. The deaths of soldiers, however, were what set off the riots. To this day, 86,150 Russian service members have lost their lives in Ukraine. Russia did not acknowledge these numerical values. On the other hand, funerals for fallen soldiers began to take place on a daily basis across the entirety of Russia. The news about soldiers' funerals has been censored by the Putin administration. As a consequence of this, it was impossible to determine how many funerals were held in Russia for servicemen on a given day. However, Russian citizens banded together on social media and were able to figure out how many funerals were held on the same day for soldiers. Because of this, it was demonstrated that the numbers provided by the Russian government were wholly and entirely fictitious. The people of Russia are seething with rage as a result of the situation. Red Square was the scene of rioting by millions of Russian citizens. Moscow was able to see the march of the protesters. The Russian police took decisive action and put down this uprising with extreme force. But Russian rebels did not give up. The Russian rebels made the decision to continue their uprising by pitching tents in the center of Red Square. On the other hand, the final drop that caused the people of Russia to lose their patience arrived much later. Putin made the announcement that he had given the order to mobilize the armed forces and that an additional 300,000 soldiers would be recruited. This speech caused a stir in Russia. There were demonstrations by millions of people in Russia against this decision. Rioting broke out across the entirety of Russia, but was particularly severe in the capital city of Moscow. The uprising spread even further, especially to the areas of the country that were home to various minority groups. There were significant uprisings in regions such as Bashkortostan and Dagestan. Captured by the local populace were the officers that the Russian army had dispatched to the area in order to recruit new soldiers. The level of tension between the Russian army and various ethnic and religious groups reached an all-time high. After the war, experts were heard saying that if these tensions continue to rise, Russia might disintegrate. After many years, Russia was once again threatened with the possibility of disintegration. On the other hand, after the decision to mobilize, millions of Russian citizens emigrated out of their country. At the Russian borders, long lines of people formed queues. The trend of young men in Russia joining the military or leaving the country has had a significant negative impact on the country's economy. It is becoming increasingly difficult for many businesses to find qualified employees. Many businesses have been forced to close their doors in Russia as a result of the country's poor economic climate and the scarcity of skilled workers. The unemployment rate in Russia is also on the rise. Economists are predicting that the Russian economy will fail in the very near future. These dissidents in Russia intend to put an end to this precarious pattern. Because of this, the insurgents are eager for the war to be over, for Putin to step down. The slogan, "I will not die for Putin," is being written all over the place by Russian rebels. This slogan has developed into the most prominent representation of the anti-Putin movement in Moscow. These actions have also garnered the support of academics and artists from Russia. The Russian authorities are sending more forcefully to the growing influence of the rebels in the country as a whole. The Russian police steps in and takes a very hard stance against the rebels. There have been arrests of thousands of rebels. The brutality displayed by the police toward the protesters infuriated everyone. A Russian police station was destroyed by rebels' fire. They were able to see some armored vehicles used by the Russian police as well as some regular police vehicles. On the police radios, the rebels who had succeeded in infiltrating the police sang the slogan, "I will not die for Putin." The rebels made fun of the Russian government by listening in on police radios. These events have caused a significant amount of harm to Putin's reputation. The Kremlin also discussed the failure of the Russian police to put an end to these demonstrations, which was another topic on the agenda. The continued chaos in the streets makes the government increasingly unstable. A military takeover is one possible outcome of this situation, according to the opinions of some experts. Some people believe that if there is a military coup in Russia, Putin will be taken into custody and put on trial. That's why Vladimir Putin is making every effort to put an end to the rebellions. On the other hand, the rebels never give up. What are your thoughts on the unrest that has occurred in Russia? Do you think that as a direct result of these riots, the Russian government will step down? Do you believe that the Russian military will stage a coup to seize power? Please enlighten us with your thoughts.